Around 400 companies have withdrawn from Russia, their services, their businesses, again, in part of punishing Putin for this invasion in Ukraine. There's one in particular that hasn't. Well, there's a few that haven't. I mean, the other day we talked about how Papa John's in some form or fashion also hasn't. But this particular one you might not be surprised by. It is Koch Industries, and Dave Robertson is the president and COO of Koch Industries. He did issue a statement talking about their reasons behind it, and did start with a little bit of a condemnation for Russia and what they were up to. So the horrific and abhorrent aggression against Ukraine is an affront to humanity. It violates our company's values and principles, which are grounded in the fundamental truth that the system most conducive to human well-being, progress, civility, and peace is one based on respect for the dignity of the individual, the consistent rule of law, and the right to freely exchange goods and services. Wow, nice. It also goes on, the statement continues on, how they won't be doing much about all these horrible things that are going on. Koch company Guardian Industries operates 2 glass manufacturing facilities in Russia that employ about 600 people. We have no other physical assets in Russia, and outside of Guardian, employ 15 individuals in the country. Now, while Guardian's business in Russia is a very small part of Koch, we will not walk away from our employees there or hand over these manufacturing facilities to the Russian government so that they can operate and benefit from them. There's a report by Bloomberg in 2011. It did reveal that they also flaunted some of American sanctions against Iran, so different country with some sanctions, and they went around those as well. So the billionaire Koch brothers allegedly made a ton of money off of sales of petrochemical equipment to Iran. They dodged the US trade ban using foreign subsidiaries. The company allegedly engaged in illicit payments in Africa, India, and in the Middle East from '99 to 2003, had to pay more than $400 million in fines. The report quotes an employee saying that managers taught them how to steal and cheat. The technique was called the Koch method. It's like they have a name for it. So specifically, some of these organizations that received the funding from the Koch brothers, the Koch Industries, are also towing this company line because obviously. So there's a nonprofit that's funded by Charles Koch. It's called Stand Together, and Dan Caldwell tweeted this out. The Stand Together community supports targeted sanctions against Russia in response to its immoral invasion of Ukraine. We also believe that sanctions are a legitimate tool of statecraft. However, broad-based economic sanctions rarely achieve their desired policy outcomes. So how can we support them? Also, Dan, he's the vice president for foreign policy for them as well. And the president of the American Institute for Economic Research, which is another Koch-funded organization, they echoed again with this message. The United States can and should do very little for Ukraine, AIER President Will Ruger said. Ukraine simply doesn't matter to America's security or our prosperity. On the issue of sanctions, Ruger suggested that they make it much harder actually for Russia to stand down because Putin does not want to, quote, appear to cry uncle to this pressure. Also, further, there's Concerned Veterans for America. That's another organization that's funded by Koch brothers, and they said this. I urge you to exercise and encourage restraint as America responds to Russia's immoral invasion of Ukraine. We should avoid actions that may aggravate the situation further or have damaging repercussions to the American prosperity. There's so many tentacles and lines and connections from Koch Industries to some of the other companies that they're funding and also work with, that this handy little image here shows us exactly how many different connections those are. I could explain it to you, but I'd have to first look deeper into it for the next 45 minutes to an hour. But that's how many angles they have at this. So let's just translate for you guys, right? Because they speak in horse crap, and I'm a decoder of it. Okay, so they say, oh, the horrific aggression of the Russians is just terrible. And then they speak out of both sides of their mouth, and they send their political groups to go out and say, as JR just read you, Ukraine doesn't really matter. It's not worth getting involved in. And at the end they say, now remember, let's remember the most important thing is American prosperity, which by the way means their own prosperity. They don't mean your prosperity. They mean, no, even though Charles Koch is one of the richest people on the planet, his greed is endless. He's like, oh, the Ukrainians are getting murdered? I don't care at all. I care about my prosperity. I need another billion on top of my, what is he up to? 48 billion, 34 billion. What difference does it make? It's not enough, bro.
Hey, Charles Monster Koch. When is it enough? Dude, you're in your 80s. What are you gonna do with it? So how many Ukrainians are gonna die so you can make an extra couple of bucks? So Then they get into the horse crap about, some sanctions work and others don't. In other words, the ones that don't affect us are fine with. The ones that do affect us, hey, that cost me 13 bucks. Okay, now, so do sanctions work? Yes. Now, do they work all the time? Absolutely not. So where do they work? They work in a country where it's not one dictator like Saddam Hussein or Kim Jong-un, because they're never gonna run out of caviar and they don't care about anyone else. And they don't work in a system where it affects everyone equally. They work best when there is a group of people that have economic power that isn't just one person, like oligarchs. How do we know they've worked in the past? A situation just like that was South Africa. And after you put enough pressure and sanctions on, the wealthy of South Africa said, no mas, we've had enough, it's cost us too much money, we're gonna change apartheid. Now, are they working in Russia in this particular case? We just covered on the show yesterday, Putin came out saying, now the sanctions have devastated us. Putin is saying it, right? And I need the Russian people to brace for impact, because inflation is going to be bad, our markets are hurt, our ruble is in massive trouble. But let's stick together as Russians, it's all worth it for my glory. I mean Russian glory, right? So Putin himself is telling you how much it's hurting him and how he's lost leverage. We're hearing stories of how oligarchs are pissed at Putin, which is what you want, so they could put pressure on him to end it. And here comes the Koch method going, yeah, but it's putting sanctions on the Russians, even though it's working, it might save thousands of lives in Ukraine, it's gonna cost us 30 or 40 bucks. And so our infinite greed says, let them die. And that's who Charles Koch is. That's exactly the kind of monster he is. Amy.
Yeah, another role that this could play in the peace talks really is giving the power to be part of the negotiation, saying that if you come to a peaceful negotiation, then we'll lift these sanctions, and that's another important aspect we need to look at this. And then I'd like to add, I was thinking to myself, why is this even a story? And I think it comes down to because of the political influence that the Koch brothers and their business has in our political discourse in this country. I mean, I was looking it up, and since 1990, they funneled in over $72 million into campaigns, with $14.5 million going into campaigns just this last cycle. And it more than doubles when we talk about the money they're putting into lobbyists. So it really goes back to really highlighting again, the sickness we have in this country and allowing corporations to act as individuals and have a voice in our political system. And it gives them much more power than they should have.
So Amy, great point, because why do we even care about the Kochs? We only care, not because we care about one billionaire's opinion. No, because he buys half our politicians. They're the largest political donors in the country. All these people have insane conspiracy theories about Soros and the Council of Zion runs the world and insanity, right? No, the Kochs, the Mercers, the largest donors in the world to politicians actually control the politicians, because they give them literally millions of dollars, and they're not at all Jewish. It doesn't have anything to do with insanity like that. It has to do with the real world. The real world is they're greedy, and they think, hey, you know what? I pay an American politician, they're gonna do exactly what I want. They're my dogs. Now, how do they know that? Through history. So if you don't know, the Kochs originally made a huge part of their fortune by stealing from Native Americans. They got caught, they were being investigated by the federal government, and that is when they first discovered, this was decades ago, the Supreme Court allows us to put money into politics. And they started buying senators. One of the very first senators they bought was Bob Dole, who later, not coincidentally, became the Republican presidential candidate against Bill Clinton. Why? Because he had the most money. Where did he get the money? From the Koch brothers and from Koch Industries, which are based in Kansas's home state. And shockingly enough, the senators that they initially contributed to helped dismiss the case against them. They steal, they rob, they do the Koch method, and then later they buy Republicans, and the Republicans say, we don't want to regulate Koch Industries because that would be against freedom. No, it's just the most obvious corruption you've ever seen. It's basically our oligarchs, people like Charles Koch, saying you better not touch their oligarchs. All of us corrupt people across the world are in this together, no matter who dies.
There's been talk, and I wonder this too, because as I hear it, you talk about the people that are actually on the ground, say in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, because Belarus is part of some of those sanctions that we're talking about at the first, off the jump, when it comes to the trade things. So they're gonna feel the pain as well. What about those people? So I get it. What about those people that are affected? Because the Koch Industries and things like this will be the driver that allows them to buy off more politicians. I think they can pull these types of schemes. But then there's people really on the ground that are affected. And how much of a voice do they really have when it comes to shouting at someone like Putin, hey, this is hurting, you might want to change course. How much does he really care? And what limits does he have once that happens is the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think Charles Koch cares about anything other than money. And he's a terrible guy. But guys, this isn't about one particular evil person or another. It's about the system. So Amy's a candidate in Nevada, mainly Vegas area, and she doesn't take corporate PAC money. In fact, she was one of the original Justice Democrats, and we did the rule about you can't take corporate PAC money because it corrupts. It corrupts by definition.
It does.
And here's most of the Republican Party taking that Charles Koch money. And if you're a Republican who's always saying, oh, George Soros, he's super evil, and he's the one that's a puppeteer and controlling people, then why would you be in favor of Charles Koch being your puppeteer? Moving all of your politicians around and getting them to betray you, betray innocent people for their own profits. Let's get all the money out of politics, then we don't have to worry about oligarchs here in America. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.